It's the Onstage Podcast with Chris Robert. I was pleased to meet you. I'm so happy that you were able to join us today.
Lovely to meet you.
Yeah, I was, thanks. Mutual. I was actually looking at that you have quite a interesting, about the accident and everything. We should hopefully that you can share with us a few little details about that. But before we move on, um, can you give us a little bit of background of who you are so our audience can get an idea of who Rachel Michelberg, I think it is?
Yes, it's German, so it's actually Michelberg, but nobody can say that. So unless you speak German, so we just say Michelberg. It's just easier. Yeah. So thank you so much for having me here. So I was born and raised right here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Traveled a bit, lived in Germany on and off a bit, but really have spent pretty much my whole life here. And when I was in high school, you know, I tried desperately to figure out something I wanted to do besides music, because I knew that I knew that how unstable a career it is and how difficult it is to support yourself. And um, but I just couldn't figure anything else out. So I ended up becoming a voice major. And even though I'd done mostly theater music, well, I'd done some classical because I sang in choirs for many years. But my voice, I really wasn't much of a dancer, and my voice just wanted to be classical. So even though I love musical theater, so that's what I studied, and I did opera for many years. I was very lucky to do some wonderful leading roles in opera, all different periods, mostly Mozart and bel canto. So the 19th century Italian opera was kind of my favorite. But I also was doing musical theater at the time, and at the same time, I was doing day gigs, working in restaurants, working in offices. It's very, as you know, very difficult to make it without several different gigs. And I became a cantor in a synagogue. They're called cantorial soloist because it's a certification. It's like being a rabbi. You can't just call yourself a cantor. But I acted as a cantor, and I did a lot of the duties. So I was doing that at the same time, and that was really wonderful. The music is very rich in that tradition. And then I had kids. And that's kind of not entirely, but it changes how available you are, obviously, to perform. And let's see. And after about 10 years of marriage, and our children were 6 and 7 years old, my first husband was involved in a small plane crash, as you mentioned. And he survived it, but with this very, very severe traumatic brain injury. And so I was faced with this dilemma because he needed full-time care, and our marriage had been not doing well at the time of the crash. So I had this person who was completely changed cognitively, physically, everything was disabled. And so I wrote a book about it. I wrote a book. See, crash. Oh, it's over there. I wrote a book about my experience because I thought it was an important story to tell, that how I dealt with the expectations of becoming a caregiver. And at the same time, I tried to keep singing. I pivoted into teaching. I left my cantorial work and I started teaching voice, primarily my areas of expertise, musical theater and opera, and classical music. Although now it seems in my studio, I have several people very interested in pop. So I'm, I'm educating myself about how to teach microphone techniques, which is quite different. Most singers, at least singing teachers, were trained in the classical discipline, and so it's a quite a different production. Vocal production and techniques are different. So so I just had to download this Olivia Rodrigo song. Apparently, I'm not being a pop fan. I'm trying to like keep my mind open and say, okay, well, I want to meet my students where they are, right? So yeah, that's my life in a nutshell. I'm an author. I still do musical theater. In fact, I'm in a show right now. I vocal direct community theater productions, doing that right now as well, working on marketing and publicizing my book. And I've got 16 voice students.
That's quite many accolades over the years, but the one thing is that you had to be a reluctant caregiver for your husband. And tell us more about what was that like for you when you had suddenly had to discover that he needed a lot of care, and what was that like for your children?
Yeah, it was devastating, as you can imagine. Your life can change in a moment, and like it was a little bit to the point where I wasn't sure if I was going to make it through. And the only reason at the time I kept going, it's like I had to put one foot in front of the other, and I had to be stay sane for my kids. And of course, then the question is that it begs the question, well, what about me too? like I have to take care of myself before I can take care of them, right? So I try to tackle those questions in the book. I learned through my body's physical responses. I became very ill myself shortly, just before he was supposed to come home from the hospital. And I believe my body was responding to the stress of this responsibility, and so I was. It's a pivotal scene in the book where I am discussing with a social worker who has dealt with this situation many times. She worked for workman's compensation because my husband was on a work trip, so. She was very clear with me that I wasn't in any physical condition to take care of him, and that I should consider different options, like having him go into a facility for temporarily. And I just responded with, I was horrified. I thought, I can't do that. I can't put my husband in an institution. I can't do that, even temporarily. She worked with me. She listened to me. She asked me to reconsider, and explained how hard that would be on the kids. And that kind of pushed me over the edge. And I allowed that to happen. And then as time went on, I realized that I really wasn't capable emotionally, anything, to be his full-time caregiver in our small home. And his family was very upset about that. They felt that that was my duty. That was my
Wow.
obligation. And so the book is also about the conflict with his family and the dissonance there. Yeah, so.
Was there any pushback from the family having you release that book?
That's a great question. I didn't ask their permission. They're in Israel and Germany. I did send a copy to one of the main characters, my sister-in-law, my husband's sister, to read first before it was published. And she never responded to me. My kids have been to visit there, and they've said that she's not very happy about it. And yet we still speak to each other. I didn't push it. I did change some names Other people, not the family, but other people who I don't speak very positively about. So writing a memoir is often very tricky if the people involved who you are not painting in the best picture, the best light, are still alive. And that's very often the case. So you have to really think about, will I be sued? will I lose will a relationship be damaged because of this book? And memoirists have different ways of handling it. They can discuss it with the people in advance. I was telling my truth. And that's what a memoir is. You're telling your truth. If she wants to tell her truth or others want to, that's their prerogative, right? And that's one of the things I learned when I was learning how to write, because I'm a trained musician. I was not a trained writer. I was always pretty good at it, certainly better than math and science. But I had to learn the craft. And so I attended many classes and retreats, and of course, as an avid reader, it was fascinating, to learn how writers, how the process happens, the editing and all of it.
Can imagine, like, you got your own little Spare, like Prince Harry wrote a book called Spare. You got your own little book called Spare, sort of, but yours is more tragic. But that's a terrible thing, and knowing all the pushback and all the, like, this is your duty, like, to take care of your husband or take care of my son or take care of my brother, whatever. And it's sort of like the family wasn't even there for you. They should have showed you more support and more love to actually help you with him. Did they just leave you alone with him and not even bother?
No, no, no. On the contrary, particularly his sister visited many times from Israel,
Mm,
which, it's a long way, and she had a life there, a husband and
mm,
kids, and it wasn't really like that. In fact, I really tried in my storytelling to be clear that she was doing what she thought was right. She felt that he should be in a home, and she was trying eventually to get him to come to Israel and live with her.
mm.
So, but there was a big lawsuit that was happening. It was with the plane had engine trouble. So there was a big civil lawsuit, and that lawsuit needed to get settled before he left the country. And we kept trying to tell her that, and she just didn't want to hear it or something. I don't know, because the lawsuit was settled to our favor, and he is set for life because of it. If we'd taken him out of the country or gone against the advice of the attorneys, it would be a very different scenario now with financially. And he is completely taken care of financially, and so is she, because of this.
Yeah,
And
you need the help. So that's a terrible tragedy. And everyone, the book is called Crash: How I Became a Reluctant Caregiver. We'll give the link to Amazon down below.
thank you.
We appreciate that story. Rachel, we want to hear more about your vocal performances, and wondering, have you ever, like you mentioned that you've done a lot of opera, would that include Nessun Dolma at all in your repertoire?
Oh, don't
That's
stop.
my Mount Everest song, by the way.
Did you climb Everest?
No, I'm saying that's a song that's very
Okay.
difficult to do. Sorry. I
No,
was
that's
using Mount
fine. I didn't
Everest
get the
as
reference.
it's an expression, knowing that there's something that you can't do is very hard to attain. So you're saying it's your Mount Everest.
That's the first time I've
So
ever heard that
Nessun
expression.
Dorma is
It
quite
makes
a song.
absolute
So
sense.
tell us.
Yeah, that is from an opera by Puccini called Turandot, and
Yeah.
it's his last one. And no, that is not one that I have performed in. It's very seldom performed anywhere else besides the best opera houses in the world, because it's such a difficult opera to perform. It's so grandiose and lavish. It's like Aida. I mean, you couldn't I eat it, sometimes they have like live elephants and that kind of thing. It's like the Phantom of the Opera of the regular opera world, where it's got a lot of bells and whistles, and so
Yeah.
not to mention that tenor part, which is incredibly hard. I have done a Puccini opera though. I've done La Boheme, which was really fun, and that is done all the time in local opera companies, regional opera
Yeah,
companies.
but to go from opera straight to like Carmen to My Fair Lady and then Mother at Best 3 times. Sound of Music. Wow. That was my mom's favorite movie. I love the Julie Andrews version, and it's just amazing. So, how was it for you to learn all these parts, and especially Eliza Doolittle, using that big thick Cockney accent? How did you manage that?
You know, it's it's just I had really good training. I had great teachers. I had a very natural instinct for acting since the time I was little. I have to tell you this very funny story. So when people often ask me, well, how long have you been singing? It's like, when you need to sing or you need to play an instrument, or it's sometimes it's more like it's like breathing. Like you have to. It's so part of your soul and your it's like food and water. You need it as much as that. And but the first time I kind of got bitten by the bug, I was in kindergarten, so 5 years old. And I was cast, we had a play, The Little Red Hen, and I was cast as the Little Red Hen. And I was upset because the piggies got to wear pink, and pink was my favorite color. So I told my mom I wanted to be a piggy. And she says, "Oh, sweetie, you'll be okay wearing red once you realize how much fun it is to play the leading part." And she was right. And from there, it just was sort of in my blood. Did theater all throughout school. So going to different characters is the easy part. And the Cockney accent, I'm pretty good with languages. Like I speak German, and I'm very comfortable with languages. So it's just you hear it and you mimic it. And in more professional theater companies where they have the budget, they can afford to hire a dialect coach to actually work with you on those things. But yeah, I was doing so much opera and then doing musical theater roles like Mother Abbess that require an operatic voice. So, I would have rather played Maria in The Sound of Music, but I understood that my particular skill was, those high notes, and I could do that, and so that's what happened.
So, do you remember who you Anne-Marie Higgins was? Do you remember the actor that played the
Henry
opposite of
Higgins.
you?
Oh, I don't remember.
Henry
I've had
Higgins.
yeah. Just you white, Henry Higgins.
Anne-Marie Higgins. Yeah, that's funny. You remember who he was? Remember the actor? Was that you remember the people that you worked with in your roles?
I remember his name was Ken, but it was a long time ago.
Mm.
When in my bio, I tend to list the roles that are my favorites, plus roles that people will absolutely recognize, in a bio, because there's lots more obscure roles that I've done, or I should say obscure, less well-known pieces that I've done. But unless you're an opera lover, you probably wouldn't know about. Yeah.
I like opera. I sing a lot of Italian, Andre Bocelli. My favorite is De Prayer, but it's very difficult to find the female duet partner to actually hit it right off, because you have to, at some point you have to sing the opera Italian lyrics together, and you have to be like in sync. Um,
Really, it's hard to find.
yeah, I've noticed that sometimes when I've had duet partners, they're just okay. Um,
Oh
and I'm not going to name any names because I
no.
might. But and a lot of it is my favorite. And also did a lot of chorus line. There's a song called um, what is love, I think.
What I Did for Love.
What I Did for Love. Yes, sorry, I should know that one. What I Did for Love. I like that one. I like the musicals because my mother and I would go see musicals quite a lot. And one of my favorites one was Oliver. And I'm thinking
Mm.
if you were given the chance to play in Oliver, I'd think you'd be like the Cockney Flower Girl. Remember her? I think her name was
Oh,
Rose.
I
I
think
think
are you thinking about Nancy, the one who actually gets
Nancy.
the
Yes, Nancy.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I vocal directed Oliver years ago. My kids were in it. My daughter was the strawberry seller, ripe strawberries, ripe, in the Who Shall Buy sequence, and my son was one of the pickpocketer boys. Um,
That's
that
amazing.
part, that part requires what we call belting. Do you know about the different um, vocal productions? So that's all chest voice. Um, and it was never my strong suit. It was never my favorite thing. I can teach it now and I understand it. I just didn't enjoy doing it as much. So it's not a bucket list role. Definitely. It's a wonderful uh, show. It's very dated now. And with the domestic violence, it's very hard to do that show now. And I don't know. I think theater's in a difficult time right now with so much more awareness going on. For example, I was just talking to somebody yesterday about the Gilbert and Sullivan operetta, The Mikado,
Mm.
which of course is very negative stereotypes, and many of the Gilbert and Sullivan companies are changing it to make it more acceptable. But I think that's an ongoing issue. South Pacific, this woman essentially, she pimps out her daughter, and it's cringy, and yet back in the 40s and until sort of recently, it was like, oh yeah, that's just what happened.
I know it's ridiculous that we have to have this politically correctness, and it's too bad because my favorite stage play, my favorite musical was Showboat, and
Mm.
you can't even sing some of the numbers because it deals with the slavery and about cotton pickers and you can't even sing those songs anymore, and it's terrible because South Pacific was a good one. um, and I can imagine one day they say, okay, you can't do Oliver because it has to do with a little lost little boy, and we can't do that anymore. It's kind of silly what they're doing. Like if they just leave it alone, and it's just history, that just the things that they just want
Well,
to change everything around. They don't want people to know this is what happened during slavery. This is how it was. Now they're trying to make it so nobody knows about it. Like they're trying to hide that history, and don't do that.
I think the objection is when it's being glorified and when it's being glamorized in some level and being glorified and not really being discussed in from different perspectives. So I get the objections and I get the ambivalence, and I think they're important discussions to have. Um, However, I agree. It's if we look at it as a historical piece, this is how it was then. It's it's a little bit more tolerable. But yeah, I think it's important to have these discussions. At least look back at a show and say, okay. In fact, a couple of years ago, I went to see a student of mine in Bye Bye Birdie, um, and she played the teenager that. Do you know the show at all?
Hmm.
The Elvis
Yeah, my
Presley
friend Amy
character.
was in that. Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah. So my student played Kim, the girl, and it's really there's this guy in his 20s hitting on this teenager, and that was I'd seen the show before, but that was the first time I was like, this is wrong. Because it was, like I said, it was being glorified a little bit. So I think there's a place for the discussion.
Yeah, it's kind of
These.
ridiculous because I remember back in the 80s, my girlfriend was 16, I was 20. But when I mentioned that to people, they think it's creepy and thinking, what are you talking? I said I was 20. I didn't say I was a 50-year-old going out with a 20-year-old, you know? It's sort of
Yeah.
like everything's changed too much. How would you find that the Rachel today, amidst all the tragedy with your husband and everything that's going on in your life, and the Rachel before the accident, how do you kind of think about both of them are the same? Do you think you've grown over that time? Do you think you're more of a powerful powerhouse vocal? How do you feel about how do you bring it all together?
So I've never been asked that question before. That's food for thought. I've definitely grown. There's no question. It was the most, I had to grow, or I was going to just dissolve. I had to stay strong. I had to be resilient. I had to learn resilience. Until then, I suppose I was, but I was never tested in that way. And I never was being tested at the same time that I was raising two kids who were completely reliant on me for their health and well-being, for everything. So I don't know how anybody could go through a trauma like that and not change, and hopefully for the better, and grow. I believe that I'd like to think that I'm more in the present, that I'm more appreciative and grateful for every day, for every moment, for my cognitive awareness, for my physical health and well-being, for my kids' mental health and well-being, and because, as I said at the very beginning, in a moment, your life, his life was, of course, just horrifyingly altered. He would never have the same quality of life again. He was never able to hold down a job. He couldn't be a real parent. He still has a relationship with his kids. He's still alive, but my father is 93 and he's in a nursing home, and David, who's 62, he's cognitively much worse off than my father is. My father does have dementia. So, I feel like, of all of us, of course, David lost the most. Yet so many were affected in his circle. And I think it gave me an increased awareness of how lucky I am, and how important good health is. I know that seems a little trite, but that's the truth.
It's so difficult, but just the strength that you exude, and just the ability to spend one day at a time realizing you got all these things on your plate. I really like the saying that like the most unselfish thing you can do is to take care of yourself first. I like that little quote that you said. And to explain a little bit further, I I was reading it and said, okay, so once you take care of yourself, you can truly give to your family. Did you find that that was true? Did you find that a reality?
Oh yes, for sure. There's an old cliche, if you're in a plane and you use pressure in the cabin, you've got to put your oxygen mask on first so that you can help your children. And that is absolutely the truth. I was saved by therapy and a lot of supportive, wonderful friends who encouraged me to both the therapist and the friends and the social workers, to own my own truth. And my truth was, and my truth kept coming up through therapy, that I wasn't going to be comfortable being his caregiver. But yet it was such an unpopular truth. It was such a, it was so antithetical to what we're taught, is to do the right thing, right? To take care of the people that we love, and no matter what. So did that answer your question? I think I meandered from what you were asking.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's sort of like you go through this tragedy and you have to live one day at a time, realizing that now you're in this point where your father's not only 93 and got dementia, because I'm familiar with that, but your husband has sort of the same cognitive. And that's now you're dealing with double because, oh, my father's 93 and he's got almost Alzheimer's, dementia. And now my husband is like, you just don't know what you can bear. It's like too much. You just want to give up. But then you sort of exude this, this confidence and the strength that you just want to keep going. How is your life now, Rachel? How is it at this point?
Well, thank you for asking that. I do want to clarify that this accident happened in 2005. So it's
Okay.
been almost 18 years.
20,
So at the
yeah.
time, my father was not, he was fine. I was using it as it's hard for people to sometimes understand what a brain injury is like. And of course they're different from person to person. And yet when I talk to my father, it feels very much like I'm talking to my former husband. And I will say former because that's part of the story, is that we did end up getting a divorce. Because
Oh,
I was 45 years old. I was not ready to, to be alone the rest of my life. And he just couldn't be a husband to me anymore. So, and so now, so I'm remarried. As I said at the beginning, I married a physicist who's studying dark matter. And we couldn't be more different in some ways. Yet he's a real theater lover and loves classical music. So we have that in common. Yeah, my kids are great. My daughter lives in San Francisco. She's got a great job. My son is training to be a teacher. He lives not far from me here, and they're both doing great right now. It was the pandemic. It was really hard on them, but I think it was hard on all young people. Really, really interrupted my son's college years. He was having so much fun, and then everything got shut down. But I'm not. I think everybody has a story about that. Yeah, so I have a chamber music concert series that I have a house that's quite large, and it's a really nice venue for chamber music. So I do that. I did an all French program last year. This year I'm doing all women composers.
hmm
I'm going to have cellist and a flutist and a violinist, piano, and two singers.
Wow.
It's going to be great. Yeah, I decided, I've got this great space. I'm going to do this. I volunteer as an advocate for a foster teenager who's in the foster system. It takes quite a bit of time. So I'm, volunteering. I'm doing music. I'm getting ready to, when it starts to warm up even more, plant my garden. I do things that are just very life-giving, like being out in my garden. And we try to go see theater all the time, as much as possible, an opera, symphony, ballet. Not being too far from San Francisco, it's pretty easy to do that.
Wow, that's amazing how your life has really changed. How about well, your previous husband who couldn't be much of a husband anymore? What was his feeling when what's his cognitive now like? Like, did he understand that why are you divorcing me, or did he understand that, or?
Yeah, there's a whole chapter in the book about that. He cannot he cannot comprehend issues the way you and I can. He never could, and it's gotten worse as he's gotten older. His cognitive decline has increased. He is not able to process information and have a rational or any kind of response that. And I knew that, and it was a very difficult session when I told him that we were going to separate permanently, and he had his therapist there with him and a support system. I had mine, and he got very angry and a little bit aggressive. So, and which is to be expected with a brain injury. It's just devastating what happened to him.
Have you ever had other wives or husbands of spouses who sort of a hassle saying you shouldn't be leaving him? I've stayed with my husband or wife ever since, and Has you ever had that sort of issue with others?
Not directly. I have had people leave reviews about my book that say that they really didn't like it. I was selfish and I was uncaring and so on. And I expected that. They always hurt, but I expected it because I'm putting myself out there so honestly, and so making myself so vulnerable. In some ways, I feel like I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish because I do get those kinds of comments as well. Because everybody comes from their own perspective, right? Their own feelings, and I knew there would be people that wouldn't approve of how I handled it, and that's not why I wrote the book.
Yeah, I can't imagine being in your position, but I have been when my mother was diagnosed with cancer. My father stuck with her right through to the end, and then when he got himself cancer, all the family just, they went around him and started helping him, and because my sister was a nurse and she was there to help him, so it's sort of nice to have family there. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't know what it would be like if my spouse would ever had brain injury or anything. And I've heard from several people saying how one had to put their musical career on hold because their father needed care, so they couldn't do anything until it's sort of like I've heard from many musicians that said that, and it's a tragedy, and I'm so sorry that had to happen with you. Um, what do you think was your most your favorite performance on tour so far?
Well, I wish I could say that I did a lot of touring. Most of my work was sort of local, very, very good high level companies, but I didn't ever really achieve that level of status where I was touring. That's okay. I did do some out of town work, but I think my favorite. I think Carmen is. There's nothing like doing the role of Carmen. It is a spectacular role.
Habanera. Did you sing that number
Yeah,
Habanera? That's
habanera. Mhm.
Habanera. Yeah.
Habanera. And the seguidilla and yeah. Oh yes. She has 4 arias actually. And it's a long opera. It's a very demanding role. And I got to do it in French, which was just extraordinaire. It was really spectacular to do it in French. And I did it in English as well. So that was just it's such a beautiful piece of work. It's got everything in it. It's got um, suspense and beauty, and it's just, and I think it's still relevant. There's a stalker and um, smuggling, and yeah. I just think it's fabulous work. The other roles I've loved. I do love the musical theater. I loved doing Eliza. Marion and the Music Man was really fun. Uh, but I think that if you're familiar with the opera Norma by Bellini, um, I got to
Hmm.
play the second lead, and because I'm actually a high mezzo soprano. Um, the bel canto repertoire, which is, like I said, the late 19th century Italian repertoire, Bellini, Donizetti, so post Mozart, Rossini. Uh, it's the way it's written is like, it's like candy for the voice. It's so wonderful to sing. And so I loved doing that. And yeah, most of the shows I've done, I doesn't matter what it is, I enjoy being on stage.
Do you, when you said you got 30 students, do you teach them the way for them to sing like you, or do you teach them the basics and then they go out and, like, what if one of them says, I want to be in Carmen, or I want to be Mary Poppins because it's a musical? Give them basics. This is how you do it. Watch your breathing techniques, the vibrato. There's the how do you go about teaching someone?
Oh yeah, I would never try to shape someone to be like me. Everybody is so unique in with their vocal instrument, their personality, their type, everything. Um, Most people come to me wanting to do community theater or theater plays in their school situation, and they want to get better roles. They want to do well in auditions. They want to feel confident. So as I said before, I try to meet them where they are. I see what they're interested in. I do encourage to work on some classical music because I do feel, I always equate it to, if you're a dancer, even if you don't want to do ballet, you should at least study it a little bit, because it will give you some technique and range that you wouldn't have otherwise had. Uh, so um, so if someone is really just wanting to focus on musical theater, that's what we focus on. If someone's willing and interested to delve into the classical world, absolutely. And I've turned people onto it that way. Just they didn't really have much knowledge or exposure to it, and I'll be like, let's try this song, or let's try this little aria. But yeah, most people don't come in unless you're teaching in a university setting. Most people don't come in saying, someday I want to do Carmen, because that's kind of, talk about an Everest moment. That would be that. um, and yeah, like I said, I have this new student who was very clear that she wanted to try some pop. So that's what we're going to do.
Do you have any advice for aspiring musician? And they just come up to you and say, um, "This is Michelberg. I want to do what you're doing." And what would you tell them?
Well, most people aren't. Their goal is not to be a teacher. Uh, they Most of us that started teaching later really enjoy it, even though we trained to be a performer. Um, I would say just continue to pursue all your passions. Just keep working, keep practicing, learn as much as you can about your instrument and all kinds of different music, so that you never know what's going to happen. I talked to a potential new student yesterday who classically trained all through high school and most of college, and then sort of realized that she really loves rock and roll, and so she's fronting two bands right now. and
Wow.
But her voice has been really tired and fatigued, and she wants to kind of go back to basics and sort of revisit that, so that she can have some strategies and techniques for dealing with her vocal fatigue. So yeah.
That's absolutely amazing. How do you manage to stress, like when you went on performance? Uh, the incredible. Do you have like a beginning where you walk up and down, uh, breathing techniques, yoga, maybe? What do you do to keep yourself sane? Because you've been through so much.
Yeah, I've been through a lot, but as I said, it was a long time ago, and so much of it I've processed now. At the time, uh, I never had much performance anxiety. There was one role. I was doing a Rossini opera, and it was a very, very difficult role. And there was somebody super important in the audience that could help me in my career. And I remember feeling so nervous I could barely go on stage. Somehow I managed, and it was fine. But that's rare. For me, it's usually just the exhilaration. Once you get to the theater an hour and a half early, you start putting on your makeup and your costume and your wig, and you just kind of go into that zone, and you hear the orchestra tuning up. If you're lucky enough to have an orchestra these days, they do a lot with tracks. But I don't have a personal ritual. Sometimes I have to do a few deep breaths and just sort of not talk to anybody for a few moments. But it's never been that hard for me.
So it's really easy for you to just go on stage and just perform like you never performed before, and you're not shaking or sweating at all, and in your mind thinking, "What am I doing here? Why am I doing this?"
No, not at all.
Wow.
Not at all. No, and that's like I said, I've been doing it since I was 5 years old. So there's something about experience that is calming, I guess. You know what
Tell
to
us
expect.
about the Yeah. Tell us about the time. Was there ever thought a time that you just wanted to give up?
No, I I was disappointed. There was a program through the San Francisco Opera, which is one of the finest opera companies in the world, where they have a training program called the Marilla, and I was a finalist, but then I didn't end up getting in. And I remember thinking that because I was at an age where it's sort of like there weren't that many more paths to have a career that was more than just local. And I remember feeling pretty devastated when that happened. And yet I kept singing. I kept just continued to stay in the area and get pleasure that way. It's like I didn't have to be, doing the national or international circuit to get pleasure out of it. Um, and of course, it was very difficult in the years just following my husband's accident. I had an eating disorder that kicked back in. I was having all these physical troubles. I just kind of stopped practicing very much. Um, and now the roles are very limited because I'm older, and there's like I'm doing Into the Woods right now, Stephen Sondheim, and I'm the
Nice.
stepmother. So there's certain
Oh,
roles.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah, there's certain roles that are just easy and fit my age and very easily. But like I'm not going to be Cinderella anymore. I'm not going to be the baker's wife anymore because I'm past that age.
No, but if Cinderella called and said, "We need a wicked stepmother," would they choose you? Would you say, "Nope, I'm not wicked. Nope, not doing it."
You're an actor. You you do what the role calls for. It's pretty fun to be pretty mean on stage, I have to say.
Do you think there's a retirement age for musicians and Broadway stars, or do you think they can go on till they're 100?
Oh, there definitely is. I think some can go on longer than others. If they, like I say, if they pivot to taking on different roles, depends on the voice too. The voice does age, and it gets. Most people who are smart about it are not going to go past their prime, too far past their prime, because they don't want people to be left with, oh, she shouldn't be singing anymore. Oh, he probably should stop now. You don't want people to say that about you, right? And they're anyone who's on Broadway has an agent, right? And so they're going to get advice, hopefully, about that, and then switch to doing concerts or um, other types of, again, different roles.
Oh, wow. So how do you manage your free time? Like, what do you like to do?
So I mentioned before, I love to garden. I love to cook, and I live in a really nice in the Santa Cruz Mountains in the Bay Area. So I live in uh, an area where we have. Oh, my gardener just arrived. My dogs are going to bark. So apologies in advance. So I like to hike. I like to. We walk our dogs in the mountains, and so my husband and I do a lot of hiking. And yeah, I think that covers it. And bake.
Yeah. Well, I'm just learning to cook some new things myself. Um, I mean, I myself is divorced, so basically I have to take care of myself, obviously, and do my own cooking, but that's okay. But I still love singing, and I opened a podcast a year ago, and I love talking to people and other musicians, and I learned so much from them. And you get to hear just how genuine and real they are too. So I kind of like that. Um, and when you're doing Into the Woods, do you? I guess you when you practice, and do you go and you practice with others? Have you built new friendships? Have you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, excuse me for interrupting. The theater community is fairly small, and so you often know some of the people that are in the cast. In fact, the girl who's playing Cinderella, my stepdaughter, is she just did a production of Beauty and the Beast that I was also in. I was the wardrobe, so the singing wardrobe. There goes my dogs. Sorry about that. And she played Belle in that production. So that's kind of fun to do another show with her. But yeah, you do develop new relationships, and that's one of the big benefits of it. Really big benefit of doing theaters. You've got your people. You've got your people that have the same passion you do.
Yeah, we have a theater just up here. I sang at one of the. It's called the Living Arts Center, just up here. I sang a couple of times there, and I kind of miss it. COVID, COVID happened. I don't know if I can actually say that word. Well, that's not. Is that Nala and Beanie?
Yes, I'm so sorry.
What
My
kind of
gardeners.
dogs are they? You mind me asking?
I'm sorry.
What kind of dogs are they? What breed?
Yeah, sure. So Beanie, come here. He might come. So he is a little white poodle mix. I found him on the freeway. I don't know, 8
Really?
years ago. Yeah, he was in the fast lane. It was very early on a Sunday morning, and I rescued him. And then the other one is a Labradoodle. She's a 30-pound Labradoodle, so not super big.
Latino.
Um, and that's Nala. Nala's the Labradoodle, and she's 14, so
Wow.
yeah, she's getting up there.
Well, there's Nala
And they
and
like to
Beanie.
bark at the gardeners.
Yeah.
Sorry about
That's,
that, guys.
that's okay.
Nala
I love those
Nala
names.
sings with me in the studio. Sometimes if I'm going really high or my students are going high, she'll start to howl. It's the funniest thing. The students love it.
Yeah. Who would you think would be your ultimate collaboration?
Here, Nala. Oh no. I mean, I'm a huge Julie Andrews fan, but she's getting up there too. I don't know about collaborating. There's just so many performers that I love. Um, Betty Buckley and
Oh, I love Betty Buckley.
Patty LaPone. Pardon?
Patty LaPone and Betty Buckley. I love those two.
Yeah, I love Brian Darcy James. He's done a lot of. Oh, and Brian Stokes Mitchell. They're doing a lot on Broadway. Been doing. Brian Darcy James was the original Shrek, and he's in
Wow.
the revival of Into the Woods, which I think is closing now. But I miss that. My husband and I try to get to New York City once a year to go see Broadway shows.
Where do you find yourself maybe a year from now?
So I'm pretty content doing what I'm doing now. I want to continue my chamber concert series. I might add a concert. I have right now. It's only one a year, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're pretty much the only one doing it, it's a lot of work. I should ask him not to turn on the lawnmower right now. I don't know how much more time we have, but
Another 10 minutes?
okay. I'm just going to need to close the door then,
Sure, go.
so
Go
that
ahead.
it
I'll wait.
still might be a little loud. All right. Thank you so much. Forgive me. Well, that's never had to happen before. So this is Beanie.
Hi, Beanie.
He's okay. Now I can close the door and we can.
Yeah.
All right. There we go. Okay. Forgive me. That's what happens when you do stuff from home. I'm back.
Yeah. So what's this?
So,
You were also an actress. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
well, every time you sing, you're acting.
Oh, I see what you
In
mean.
fact, my students are always surprised, I think. Well, not always. They're often surprised at how much time we spend on that. Not just about the vocal technique and production, but that's what makes a performance really magical, is when the person is telling a story too, and not just singing blankly. And particularly with girls, there's so much competition. And I always tell them, you've got to really understand the character and the intention and the motivation and all that. So and opera and musical theater, it's all acting. That people forget that, but I did do I did straight plays in school, but recently, well, not recently, about 6 years ago, I did the Diary of Anne Frank, and that was really powerful. That's such a powerful story. Very, very difficult, very stressful, because of well, it was happening actually. The performance was happening just before the 2016 election. So, and as a Jewish person, it was very meaningful that what was happening in the play, and felt like what was happening in the country. So, yeah, that was a tough show to do, but a very powerful experience.
What do you think was your most hardest and difficult musical number to get down? What was the hardest to learn?
You mean in my whole?
Well, yeah, your whole, like when you were, well, what you're doing now and what you were doing before. What do you think is most hardest number to learn?
So the pieces, the solos are more about vocal technical difficulty. Um, but I was just thinking about that because learning Into the Woods, there are these what we call ensemble numbers, or when the whole group sings together. And I actually find those the most difficult to memorize. I find my solos pretty easy to memorize, but the chorus numbers, they often have lots and lots and lots of words, and you have to remember what comes next. And I remember doing the opera Falstaff, which is Verdi, and we were doing it. We were doing it in Italian, and there's a very, very, very long ensemble number. The finale, as I believe it was the finale. It was, I don't know, 15 minutes or something, and I still remember. This was years ago, but I just remember how hard that was to memorize. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah,
I would
I
say
like that
some of the
answer.
Rossini opera, some of the pieces that had a lot of what we call coloratura, which is lots of notes, runs. Those are very challenging.
Rachel, when you first started, who do you would you consider would be like musical influence? Are you into pop? Are you into rock? Are you into like Imagine Dragons or Queen? Do you like listening to old 70s music? Or you just opera,
So
classical?
yeah, I was a teenager in the 70s, and I to this day I love folk rock, 70s folk rock. So Crosby, Stills, Nash, and
Yeah.
Jackson Brown, and all those singer songwriters, Joni Mitchell. I just a huge fan, particularly acoustic, more acoustic, and when there's good harmonies and great songwriting. Um, and I was also just all kinds of Broadway music. That's what I listened to. So no, I've never been into pop. My kids were, and so I learned a lot about pop in the early 2000s, because that's when they were listening to it, and Disney shows and stuff. But like I said before, I'm having to educate myself about the pop, because I've got students that want to do it.
What do you think is the most difficult thing about being a musician? Like, is it the stress? Is it that you have to, like, say, you have to be in 8 o'clock in the evening to perform on stage in the play, of course? What time you usually get up and prepare your day? 6 o'clock, 5:30, 7 o'clock? What do you like to do in the
I'm
middle
up
in the
around
morning?
7, and I usually have to work. I usually have to work, teach. So it's just a normal day. I get up, I drink my coffee, I take my dogs for a walk, I go to the grocery store just like everybody else, and it is the adrenaline, especially during the pandemic, I was going to bed a lot earlier than normal. So, most nights I'm in bed around 10 or something, but reading, but when you're doing a show, it goes from 8 to 11 and you have to be, so the adrenaline usually carries you through, and then you get at home and you sort of just collapse. It takes just time to unwind. But
Did you think that when you earned that bachelor music degree in vocal performance, did you think it was going to get you somewhere?
No. No. When you go on stage for an audition, they don't care they care about how you sound. They don't care where you went to school. They don't care how many letters you have after your name. Sometimes it might open some doors for you to get certain auditions. But at the end of the day, I think that getting a college degree in music or theater is really more about biding your time and learning skills in order to mature. And then it does help to get another day job. Like if you have a degree, it doesn't matter if it's in music or English or Russian literature, I guess. If you have a degree that shows that you have a bachelor's degree that shows that you have some credentials and certain jobs aren't even going to be open to you. So for those reasons, I think it's still a good thing to do. But the expectation should not be this degree is going to help my music career necessarily, unless you're doing music education or music therapy, or there's even majors now in music production. I understand. I have a student that wants to do that, and there you can do that. So, and working with great teachers. So I do think what matters most is who you're studying with.
It is. Well, thank you, Rachel Michelberg, very much for joining us on the On Stage podcast. Really enjoyed speaking to you. We are thrilled that you were able to come on and tell us about your life story and about the accident. And everyone, the book Crash the link to it will be in the description. Please hit that subscribe button for more content, and we really appreciate you being with us. Thank you very much, Rachel.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Just let me close this out before you go. Bye, everyone.